Did you guys get that message? Great. All right. And now I'm going to admit everyone. Here we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll just be giving it a moment for people to arrive. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. I know some of you are just getting connected. We'll probably give it about 2 more minutes before we get going. We are expecting a few more folks to join, so we'll give it another minute or so.
What do you say we get started, Carl?
I say so, yeah, 6:03. Feels like a good time.
Great. Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. My name's JB Mack. I'm a principal planner at Southwest Region Planning Commission. We're an organization, one of 9 regional planning commissions in the state of New Hampshire that provides technical assistance to 34 towns in the Southwest New Hampshire, and we work on larger than local issues, regional issues, including transportation issues. We've commissioned a study and hired VIA to help us look at the feasibility of expanding or improving transit in our region, whether it be fixed route transit or microtransit. And Cahal O'Gorman will go over that with you as part of his presentation. I'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting, and I'm going to hand it over to Cahal to get started. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, JB. And again, I just wanted to echo, thank you so much for being here today. It's really valuable to be able to present to you and to hopefully get some of your input throughout this public meeting. And we're excited to have so many of you on the call today. I will now start. And by the way, my name is Cahal O'Gorman. As JB mentioned, I'm here with my colleagues Gal and Peter, who will be helping to support me today. They're also supporting this project. And as when we split up later in the project into breakout groups, they'll be leading some of the breakout groups. So you'll get to chat with them directly. If there are any questions throughout this meeting, given the large number of people that we have, we are asking if possible that you could put your questions in the chat. But of course, if you are, if you have any other questions that, or you don't, or you're struggling to find the chat, you can feel free to come off mute and just kind of jump in with your questions. In terms of providing feedback, I'd actually ask mostly that you hold off providing feedback initially, because we are going to break out into smaller groups where you'll get a chance to kind of speak directly to us, and we'll be capturing your notes. And I see there is a question there in the chat, and my colleague Dal or JB or someone will sort of respond to these as they come through. But I see the first question was, is there a website where you can find links to existing transit services? So I'll talk a little bit about what current public transport exists as well as part of my presentation. So to give you an idea of where we're going today, we are first going to do a project overview where I'm going to explain what we're trying to accomplish with this study. Then I'm going to do a little bit of education about microtransit, because it's a new concept that many people may not be familiar with. Next, I'm going to walk through some alternatives, and alternatives are basically ideas that we have. We're pretty early in the project, so all of these are just early stage ideas, and what we want to do is present them to you, and then we want to hear your thoughts on which ones excite you most, because we can put our effort into investigating the most popular and most useful transit alternatives in the next few months to kind of work out what they would cost and how useful they would be. And then I'll wrap up by just covering the next steps so you can kind of understand where this project goes after that. So first, project overview. The goal of this project is to examine opportunities to improve and expand transit service in the city of Keene and the surrounding communities. So we're not just looking at Keene here, we are looking at the entire Southwest New Hampshire region. And to give you an idea of roughly what that region encompasses, you can kind of see all the blue shaded area on this map. So basically right over to the border with Vermont, you can see Brattleboro there just across the river. And it does include the eastern Monadnock area. So we're talking about places like Peterborough, Jeffrey, Rindge. Of course, you can see Keene and Swansea and Winchester, Troy, Marlborough, those kind of areas. And then some of the areas in the north as well, although we know that there are sort of the majority of the population does live in, I guess, like the southern half of this map. Excellent. So we are looking at all across this blue area, and we have some ideas that cover a lot of these areas, and we want to hear from you. Just to kind of, and hopefully this addresses one of the questions we've already had, which is what public transit currently exists. The short answer is there is a bus service within Keene itself. And so you can actually see there are 2 bus routes. They run once an hour, and you can see where they go. So they sort of cover the center of Keene. They go to places like Monadnock Marketplace, up to the Y. They run along Maple Avenue. They stop, of course, at Cheshire Medical Center. And each of the routes is slightly different in where it covers. One runs clockwise and one runs anti-clockwise. And these are operated by a company called, a nonprofit called HCS. So they essentially operate that with a mix of different funding sources. In addition, there is also what we call the Para Express. So anyone who qualifies for paratransit, meaning they have a disability of some sort, is able to request a demand response trip. And basically what that means is if they live within a quarter of a mile of a bus stop, you can request a wheelchair accessible vehicle to come and pick you up and take you to your destination, as long as that is also within 3/4 of a mile of a bus stop. There is also the Friendly Bus, which is for those aged 60 and above, and that is also demand response. So no scheduled route, but you can call up and request a trip. It's also operated by HCS, and it will take you to your destination, kind of with, again, focused largely on the Keene area. And then there is a shopping shuttle that runs to Market Basket in Swansea, and that runs roughly once a week, and will pick you up at your home and take you there as well, kind of along with other people that are heading there at the same time. And then outside of Keene, there is what is called the Community Volunteer Transportation Company, CVTC, and this is basically a volunteer run service that helps people to kind of get places that they need to go, particularly things like medical appointments. And the volunteers who run this are kind of compensated for the wear and tear and fuel costs and things like that on their vehicle. Beyond what's shown here, of course, many senior centers have things like their own shuttle, and there are some other private forms of transportation, but these are the main forms of public transportation within the Southwest region. And so as you can see, if you don't live in Keene, there's really not many options for you to get around. And even within Keene, depending on where exactly you are, it may or may not be the right solution for you to get to where you're trying to go, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people are dependent on their private vehicle and are sort of, if you don't have access to a private vehicle, you may really struggle to live your life easily and get to the places that you need to go. And that's part of what this project is trying to address. So I wanted to talk a little bit about microtransit. And so this project is looking at two forms of public transit. The first one is called the first form is called the fixed route bus. And so this is the bus, the type of bus that you might know and love or not love, depending on how you feel about it, but it runs on a schedule, it has a timetable, and it has fixed stops. It may also stop between the stops. For example, the HCS bus routes, you can flag them down and they will stop between bus stops, but it does follow a timetable and a schedule. So you know at 9 o'clock, I can meet this bus here, and it will follow that route. The other form of transit is demand response. And that basically means there is no route and the vehicles move depending on where the trips are requested. And so microtransit is basically just a modernized form of demand response. And sometimes you might have heard it called on demand, or you might have heard it called dial a ride even. And so basically the way it works is within a certain set of rules. For example, you may only be able to travel in a certain zone. There are a fleet of vehicles that roam that area and carry out trips. And those vehicles can be as small as kind of a 6-seater van or even a sedan, or more commonly, they're kind of like a larger van or what we call like a cutaway bus, which essentially is one of those small buses, exactly like what currently operates the red and the black routes 1 and route 5. It could even be a full-size 40-foot bus, but kind of the sweet spot for these services is usually a cutaway bus or a large van, like a Sprinter or a Ford Transit. So today we are going to be talking a little bit about microtransit. And so I wanted to just explain a little bit about how it works. And so the typical experience if you're using a microtransit service is, first of all, you request a trip. And you do that either using a smartphone. So if you're comfortable using a smartphone, like an iPhone, you go on, you open the app, and you enter where you are and where you want to go. And then it will tell you when the vehicle can come and get you, and it will tell you when the vehicle's on the way, and you can track the vehicle using the app. If you don't have a smartphone, you can actually call up a call center and speak to a real person and say, I'm at home. Hey, this is Kahal. I'm at home. I'm trying to get to the Monadnock marketplace. When can you pick me up? And then they'll say, okay, there's a vehicle that's able to come get you in 17 minutes. You'll need to meet it out on the corner, and it will then take you along with anyone else. Yes, I see the question from Dory. It is very much like a group Uber, but it is a form of public transit. And the reason why it's a form of public transit is because it's subsidized and funded by the city, and it's funded by various funding sources, just like a bus route is. So those funding sources are typically the federal government. So the FTA often has significant funding for public transit services, and then often local communities as well. So it may be the city of Keene, and it may be kind of other local communities, and then even things like nonprofits. And then of course, fares as well. So as a passenger, you might pay $1 or $2, so that covers some of the cost, but the majority of the cost is usually paid for by the local and state and federal governments. Although in New Hampshire, there's not as much state funding as some other states that you'd see, like Vermont has a lot of state funding available. So you get in the vehicle and you share a ride with everyone who's traveling in the same direction as you, and then you get dropped off at your destination or near your destination, and you can often even rate your ride at the end or leave a comment. And you can typically also pay using a credit or debit card in the app as well, or on the call center if you'd like to do something like that. There are different types of services. The most common are like a corner to corner or a curb to curb. And so in a corner to corner or virtual bus stop model, basically you do have to walk a little bit to meet the vehicle. It's usually not as far as you would have to walk to a bus stop. It's usually only about 1 or 2 or 3 minutes walk at each end. And for a big hotspot like a Walmart, it would drop you basically right out the front of the Walmart. It's more on residential streets. You might have to walk out to the nearby corner to meet it. And then there's the curb to curb service, which basically means it drops you right at the curb outside where you're going. And so, of course, that involves more of a detour for everyone on board and is a bit more inconvenient and expensive to operate. But for the passenger, you don't have to walk as far, and that can obviously be great if you have groceries. Now, it's important to talk about those with maybe some kind of a disability. And so one of the great things is you could have a corner-to-corner service for the general population. But if someone has a disability, they can put that in their profile and they would always get a curb-to-curb service. And they would always be assigned, if they needed it, a wheelchair accessible vehicle. So maybe not the entire fleet would be wheelchair accessible. Usually, and especially if it's a small fleet, it usually is fully accessible. But basically, this service can be used by those with disabilities and essentially would pick them right up outside where they are and take them right to where they're going. Feel free to keep adding questions in the chat as I go through. But here's an example of I guess it's somewhat local. It's still actually quite a bit of a drive to Montpelier, Vermont. But this is an example called GMT My Ride. And basically you can see there's an app. It says, "Hi, we're My Ride by GMT." You create an account and then you can kind of travel anywhere within this zone in Montpelier, Vermont. And you can kind of see once you book, it says a vehicle is going to be there in 13 minutes. I know it's a little blurry to see. And then once the vehicle comes, you can kind of track it, just like that Uber type experience that Dory mentioned in the chat. So that's a local example. And there are many of these services around the United States and the world, thousands of these now. And what has really changed, because there have always been dial-a-ride services for decades. This type of demand response transit has been common, especially in more rural areas or lower density in smaller towns and villages. All that's really changed is technology has made it a little bit more efficient and a lot easier to use as a passenger. Just kind of to the same way that Uber has made it easier, but taxis have been around for many, many years. And all this has done is just made it slightly easier for the passenger. I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about one kind of difference, because this is particularly relevant for today's conversation. There are two types of microtransit. There is on-demand and there are pre-booked. And on-demand, basically that means that you request a journey for now. So you go into the app and you say, "I want to go to Walmart and I want to go now." And it will pop up and say, "Okay, you can maybe book a vehicle in 5 minutes or in 13 minutes. If there's multiple vehicles, sometimes you might get multiple proposals. A pre-booked service is kind of different. You go in and you say, "I want to travel," and you have to book in advance. So you maybe have to book for the next day. You can usually make it even shorter than that. You can say it only has to be, say, 4 hours in advance or 2 hours in advance or even an hour in advance. And you say, I either need to get to my destination by a certain time, or I need to leave my house at a certain time. And those time windows vary, but it might be as big as kind of a 30-minute or even a 1-hour window. So you say, I need to be at the hospital by 1 p.m. So therefore you would say 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. And then what happens is the app will, or the call center will calculate and say, okay, here's a 15-minute window. We're going to pick you up at 12:15 today. And the reason for that is it's worked out anyone else that's traveling around the same time. And it's worked out that 12:15 is the right time to come pick you up to group together as many trips as possible. And you can, if you're going to an appointment, obviously you would say arrive by. I need to arrive by the time of my appointment. And if you're leaving an appointment, you would say depart at. If you know your appointment's going to finish at 1 p.m., you could say I'm willing to depart anytime after 1 p.m. And why this is really relevant for this project is fully on demand, where you know that there's going to be enough vehicles close enough that you can just request right when you need it, is only really going to work in more dense areas. So think of Keene. basically Keene and Swansea and some of those surrounding areas could probably support a fully on-demand service. Whereas a pre-booked service is great for more rural areas. So think maybe like a big zone between Keene and Winchester, or a zone that kind of stretches from Peterborough down to Jaffrey and Rindge. So much bigger areas where there are only a small number of vehicles trying to cover a really big area. And so today, when we present some of the alternatives, some of the alternatives will be on demand, and some of them will be pre-booked. And so just keep that in mind when you're kind of thinking about how you would maybe use these services. I'm going to keep going, but again, please do add questions to the chat. Okay, so I'm seeing a question here from Dory who says, can you go from Peterborough to Keene? So that would depend on the zone. And so today I'm going to be showing you the different zones that we want to explore. Having a zone that would go all the way from Peterborough to Keene, that's a very long drive. As you know, that's kind of like 30 minutes. And so we're not proposing any zones that are that big. And for those longer trips, we actually find that a bus it's more efficient to have a bus that would run, say, from downtown Peterborough to downtown Keene and would basically run back and forth. And again, of course, it could go to, if you could have a zone that big, it becomes more and more expensive. And so we're trying to propose ideas that are reasonable in terms of cost and realistic in terms of actually being implemented. So I see another question, how about the entire Southwest region? That's a really, really big microtransit zone. And so at least at the start, we recommend focusing on the area, on a smaller area, and then kind of building this up over time. But like, I'll show you some examples later on, and you can get an idea of the types of areas we think would make sense for microtransit. I see Susan asks, with pre-booked, is there a way to prioritize access for a disabled person? So the way these services are designed is that you aim to provide enough vehicles that everyone has equivalent wait times, whether or not you have a disability. And in fact, if you don't do that, you are actually potentially at risk of violating, or basically not complying with the Americans with Disability Act. So you don't necessarily need to prioritize access for disabled persons, but you do need to ensure that everyone is having roughly equivalent access. So everyone is waiting the same amount of time. And that is kind of, and the goal of these services that you want to have enough vehicles that people aren't stranded. So you want to make sure that when people do request a ride, they know that they're going to get one. They might not get one in 3 minutes, but they know that they can rely on it enough to get home if they've already left home. I see Mandy asked the question, will you have certain vehicles that have car seats, and who makes sure they're correctly installed in the car? So that's kind of an implementation question, and you can, each transit agency or each city will operate the service based on their understanding of what makes sense and what they can afford. And so a few transit agencies I've worked with in cities have chosen to have car seats, but a lot of them actually ask their passengers to bring their own car seats, which I understand is definitely a challenge for a lot of people. And it really is something that kind of, it really is something that I guess varies depending on the transit agency. And I can't tell you right now whether or not the operator of this service or the city would choose to do something like that. But I do understand that that's definitely a concern, and it is something we hear over and over again, that people with small children would require a car seat to use a service like this, and that would be a barrier to them using it. I see another question. The transport website ideally would mention airport shuttles. Yeah, so we have heard a lot about the need for people to get to either buses that travel outside the region, and of course also airports. We understand there's a lot of different transit needs, and a lot of people who either have a car but find it very expensive to operate, or don't have a car at all and have no options. Typically what we found is that airports are important, but a lot of these services, the more urgent need in many places is healthcare, getting to the doctor, getting to your grocery store, getting around your local community. And then realistically, to serve an airport from the Southwest region would be incredibly expensive, and is probably not, basically it's not a priority that we've recommended in the short term. But of course, over time, if the service builds up and grows, you may be able to start thinking about some of those much longer trips. But right now, none of the alternatives that I will be presenting today would solve that problem of getting access to the airport. Thank you all for the great questions. I appreciate it. And I'm going to keep going, but keep adding questions. And I do see the website could merely be a reference to other options. Absolutely. And I know JB's on the call here, and so I'm sure he's aware. And I think he did mention that he's aware that that website is in need of an update. So maybe that's something that they can think about in the future. Thank you. So now we're going to go through and I'm going to present the alternatives. And because there's so many of you on the call today, unfortunately, I'm not going to stop on each one and ask for comments on each and every one. I am definitely going to answer your questions on each one as we go through. So add your questions in the chat and I'll try and answer them. And then after this, what we're going to do is we're going to have 3 different breakout groups. And so there's going to be a breakout group for the Keene area. So that includes Swansea and Marlborough. And you'll see the alternatives when I present them. But if you're interested in that area, come and join me in that breakout group and I'll be there to listen to your comments. If you're more interested in kind of more regional trips, so think things like Keene to Troy, Keene to Winchester, Keene to Peterborough, Keene to Brattleboro, those kind of trips, like those longer bus trips, then join the second breakout group. And if you're interested in the East Monadnock area, so think Peterborough, Jaffrey, and Rindge, join that breakout group. And I'll explain how to join the breakout groups after I presented all the options. But that way we can kind of break into smaller groups and give you a chance to share your thoughts out loud. And then at the end, we will have a quick vote so people can kind of enter the options they find most exciting. So here's a summary view of all the different options I'm about to present. And I realize there's a lot of stuff happening on this map, and I'm not expecting you to be able to comment on everything just based on this image because there's too much there. But you can see we've got a bunch of bus routes within Keene. The bus routes are shown as lines, and then the microtransit services are shown as these shaded areas. And so we've also got these microtransit alternatives within Keene. And then we've also got some microtransit alternatives going down to Winchester and a microtransit alternative over here in East Peterborough. But you can see that these aren't like covering the entire region. They're kind of focused on some areas of high need that we've identified. And then you can also see some bus routes kind of running and crisscrossing over the area. So I'm going to do each option. I'm going to present it one by one, write down anything that you think of, and then be sure to share it with us either in the breakout groups, or if you feel like you didn't get a chance to share it at the end of this meeting, you have our email addresses, and we will be looking at all the comments that we get from your email after this as well. I see a question here saying, will some of the funds for possible expanded services come from last year's congressional infrastructure bill? That's a great question. And yes, well, basically, we don't know right now what will happen with this project and which alternatives, if any, are launched. It's just too early to say. But the good news is that through the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better and kind of all of these different things that have happened recently, there is more funding for public transit than there was before. And that's kind of, I think, one of the reasons behind this study is to kind of identify what those new funding sources are and make sure that the Southwest New Hampshire region is getting the most value and getting the most of that funding as possible. Great. So I'm going to jump into this. Option number 1, I'm going to start with 3 microtransit alternatives. So these are basically, if you remember, I talked about on-demand microtransit. So these are ones where you would request when you're ready to travel. And so they're kind of focused on the Keene area. And there are 3 different options. So I'm going to just quickly flip through them. We've got a small zone that basically just covers where the current bus routes run. So it's really designed to kind of maybe be a replacement for the 2 bus routes that currently run and covers all of the stops that currently are served, but doesn't really go into parts of North Swansea or doesn't go into Marlborough, some of those other areas that we know that there's kind of a need for public transit. So we created a bigger zone, and this bigger zone it goes all the way down to West Swansea. It covers kind of the populated areas of Swansea, and then also across into Marlborough. So this zone, you can kind of see it covers 24,000 people, whereas the small zone only covers 16,000 people. So of course, most of you are going to be more interested in the bigger zone just because it's more useful for more people. The downside is it's obviously also more expensive. The third one is also covering all of Keene, but this one is actually just the Keene municipal boundaries. And so this isn't actually something I would recommend because there's not a lot of people living over here in the western part of the zone. But sometimes what we find is that when there is funding, it often is funded by something like the city of Keene. And so therefore the city of Keene might be interested in providing a microtransit service to all of the Keene ratepayers and those paying property taxes within the city. And so they might want to focus on a service like this. And unless some of the nearby communities also chip in, you sometimes end up with services that focus more on based on political and municipal boundaries. So we wanted to include this option as well. But those are the three different microtransit alternatives. And the way it would work is if you were in the zone, let's say you were at Market Basket and which is up here, and you wanted to go to Cheshire Medical Center, you would just request a ride. Within 30 minutes or so, a vehicle will come and pick you up. On average, probably wait is around 20 minutes, and it will take you up to where you're going, and you'll share that trip along with other people. I do see a question from, let me just have a look. There's a few different questions here. I see there, someone is interested in the smaller towns that have some access to microtransit. These areas of lower population may have smaller resources and much larger communities. And absolutely, I think the point there is just that microtransit can be a good tool to cover places that a bus route just doesn't make sense. So for example, if it's very low density and you just can't make a bus route make financial sense, you might be able to have one vehicle kind of cover a big area. And microtransit's also better for areas where people don't all live along a main highway because it's hard to walk. And microtransit is a good way of kind of going into side streets and down into neighborhoods where I know, especially in the winter, it can be really hard to walk when there's snow and poor weather. And of course, when it's been really hot as well, as we all know it has been lately. So those are the three microtransit zones. If you're interested in sharing your opinions on them, make sure to join the first breakout group with me in a few minutes. Now we're going to talk about a few different bus route options. So one idea would be to have microtransit in Keene. The other idea would just be to make some small changes to the bus routes in Keene, or some big changes as well. And the third option is to actually have both. So you could have microtransit that covers a lot of Keene, and then a bus route that really focuses on the most popular high ridership areas. And so we actually have looked at the ridership of the current bus route, and we see that a lot of the ridership is kind of between Cheshire Medical Center, the center of Keene, across to the Hannafords, and then down to the Walmart. And sort of that particular route is absolutely the highest ridership areas in Keene. So you could, for example, just run this bus route a lot, let's say every 30 minutes, or even more than that with just one vehicle. You could run this every 30 minutes in each direction. And then the challenge with this is all the areas around that would not be able to walk to a bus stop. And so you probably would really need to combine this with microtransit as well. Otherwise, a lot of people are going to lose access to the bus. So the benefit would be if you are in downtown Keene, or you do live close to this bus stop, you could just walk in. It's a very fast bus route that takes you to kind of all the key hotspots. So if you want to chat about that one, it's the Keene linear bus option. I'm just going to respond to Dory's question. I see Dory mentions that it's important to connect with Peterborough and Keene. Yeah, so that is one of the options, Dory. And if you want to kind of provide more feedback on that beyond the comment, definitely make sure to join that breakout group when we get to it. Here's another option for a bus route within Keene. And so this one is actually very similar to the current bus route that operates. And so right now, the way the two bus routes operate is they kind of cover the same areas, but not exactly the same areas. And so this is just about making it a little bit simpler. But I want to just point out something really important, that is a circular bus route looks great on paper, but you actually have to run it in both directions for it to be useful. Because otherwise, if you're at the medical center and you want to go, let's say, to the center of Keene, and it's running clockwise, you would have to go all the way around, which is a really bad experience for a passenger. And so by having it run in both directions, you actually need twice as many vehicles. And so this one here might be a good option if you have nothing else, because it really covers all of the existing stops, except for it does not go out to the Price Chopper in Monadnock Marketplace, and it does not go down to the Market Basket. So you might still want Microtransit to kind of cover some of those other areas. As you can see, the real challenge with bus routes is how do you cover all the places without making it very expensive or without making it really long. So one of the things we've heard from a lot of people about why they don't currently use the bus route that looks a bit like this is because it takes them 30 or 40 minutes to get to where they want to go. And so that's kind of why we've heard a lot of people might not use the bus currently. Here's another option that tries to address that. And so this is actually two bus routes. So it's a north-south bus route, which is shown in green, and then an east-west bus route. And so you could imagine the way that this one would work is if you're up in, let's say, near Tanglewood Estates or on Maple Ave, you can kind of just catch a bus that runs up and down and goes all the way to Market Basket. And so you can easily get to the center of Keene. You can easily get all the way down here to the Walmart. You just hop on the bus, and it's a pretty direct trip. You're not detouring too much along the way. And of course, if you want to travel east-west, the same thing. It's a pretty direct trip. The challenge with this one is if you're going from somewhere on the green line to somewhere on the orange line, you would have to transfer at the transportation center in Keene. And so when we plan this route out, we're going to try and make sure that those transfers are timed. So you can jump off one bus and jump on the other, and you only have to wait a couple of minutes at the transportation center. We've also heard from some people they'd like to see this route extended further up towards like Wheelock. And so we've definitely heard that comment over and over, and that's something that we're going to be looking into. So if you want to chat about this option, again, join my breakout group, which is the first breakout group, and it's focused on Keene and surrounds. And we'll be talking about all those bus routes and also all the microtransit options. Great. So now we're getting into some of the more regional options. And I do see a lot of people kind of echoing the importance of more regional connections. So you'll see a Peterborough to Keene route in these options. So the first one is Keene to Troy. We haven't heard too much excitement about this one so far. I guess just because it doesn't go that close to the places that too many people want to go. But definitely we'd love to hear from you if this is one that excites you. The next one is actually, we have two options for Winchester. So we have a bus route that sort of goes between Winchester and Keene and would kind of stop along the way, and you'd be able to kind of pick it up anywhere along the highway here, and it would take you to Keene and maybe even all the way up to the medical center as well, all in one trip. The other option for this route would actually be a microtransit service. And remember earlier, I talked about a pre-booked microtransit service instead of on demand. This would probably be a pre-booked service because the zone is so big and there just wouldn't be enough vehicles that you could be sure that there's going to be a vehicle nearby if you need it right then. But if you pre-booked it, you can kind of know for sure, okay, a vehicle is coming, I booked it yesterday, and I know that it's going to come get me, and it's going to bring me home as well, and I'm not going to have to wait an hour or an hour and a half for me to pick it up because I've already been promised the time and confirmed my trip. So there are these two different options that connect Keene and Winchester. And if this is a route that you find really important, I want you to join the second breakout group and talk to Peter and share your thoughts with Peter about this route. And that's the same for the Troy route. You'll be joining Peter in his breakout group. We also have a Keene to Brattleboro option. I do want to stress, don't focus exactly on the route. We're still finalizing exactly what these routes would look like, but the key point is this route would connect Keene with Brattleboro and maybe a stop in West Chesterfield or something like that along the way. And this would allow commuters to go between the two communities. And another thing we still have to explore is, would these bus routes run just in the mornings and the evenings? Would they run every hour? I think every hour is probably about as often as these would ever make sense to run, at least initially, or at least would be affordable. But some of these may just run 2 or 3 times in the morning and 2 or 3 times in the afternoon, depending on how much budget's available. But again, if you're really excited about a service between Keene and Brattleboro, make sure to join Peter's breakout group and let him know. The next one, again, we have 2 options. So a little bit like the Winchester one, we have a microtransit service that goes from Rindge. It includes Jaffrey, Peterborough, Franklin Pierce University, all the way up kind of to the high school, Peterborough High School, kind of north of there, and covers the hospital as well. And we also have a bus route option. So this one kind of starts down here at the Walmart, goes to the Rindge Town Center, then up through West Rindge, stops in Jaffrey, stops in Peterborough, and then kind of stops up here at the top near the school. And so again, we'd love to hear from you. Do you think it makes more sense to have a pre-booked microtransit service in this area, or would you like a bus route? And if there was a bus route, are you actually going to be able to walk out to the road? Would this actually be, we've heard from some people that walking to or from this highway can be a little bit challenging, and especially in the winter with the fast moving traffic and things like that, a little unsafe. And so again, if that's something that you think about, then let us know when you chat with Peter. Oh, sorry, when you chat with Gal, because the third breakout group is going to be for people who are interested in the East Monadnock area. So think all of these areas. And lastly, think about this one, which is Keene to Peterborough. And so I know that I see a lot of comments from people in the chat talking about a connection between Keene and Peterborough, and this would be one solution for that. So the Keene Peterborough bus route. And so you can kind of see here, it might start from Cheshire Medical Center, goes through the center of Keene, Marlborough, and then kind of Dublin, Peterborough, and maybe even up to the hospital there as well, or maybe it would just stop in central Peterborough. But if this is an option that excites you, I really want you to join Gal's breakout group, the third breakout group, and let her know in that group. So I think I answered most of the questions, and I see a lot of the comments are more people expressing their ideas and opinions, which is great. We're definitely writing those down. But now I'm actually going to pause, and I'm going to start the breakout groups and give everyone a chance to kind of get together. And so as a reminder, if you want to talk about the free microtransit options in Keene, join the first group. If you want to talk about all the bus routes in Keene, join the first group, my group. If you want to talk about some of these more regional bus routes, join the second group. If you're the one to Peterborough, you're welcome to join the third group. I know it's shown here, but you can join the second or the third group. And the third group is really about the East Monadnock area. But of course, as I mentioned, if you're interested in that bus route between Peterborough and Keene, you can also join the third group. So now I'm going to start the breakout group. So just give me a moment while I do that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then I'm going to start the breakout rooms, and I'm opening all the breakout rooms. So hopefully everyone has a notification now that is showing them that the different breakout groups are now open. And just go ahead and join the breakout group and chat in there. And we'll be back here in about 30 minutes or less. For those of you still here, let me know if you're having any trouble getting into the breakout groups, but go ahead and join as soon as you're ready.
You're on mute, Cahal.
Thank you, Gal. It looks like everyone has made it back into the main room. We have about 15 minutes to go. So I'm happy to allow we have about 5 more minutes for questions. And then I'm going to quickly do a virtual poll on the preferred option. So I know I had to cut a few people off. Did anyone have kind of 1 or 2 more questions before we move on? Okay, excellent. Well, in that case, the next step was actually we wanted to do a quick vote. And this is really just to help us understand, and we understand this is not like a representative sample of the audience, and we're definitely not going to use this vote to make any like firm decisions, but I'm just kind of curious of those of us that are here today, what of the options do you find most exciting to you? And so a few ways to answer this. You can either go to www.menti.com. Gal has put that in the chat, and you can enter the code 7095140. Or you can actually use your smartphone to scan that QR code if you have a smartphone, and just click on the link on that QR code. And once you get in there, you should actually be able to see some questions. I'm just going to actually open that up, and so I can make sure that I can, sorry, I'll make sure that I can see your results as well. Just give me a moment. Sorry, what I'm gonna do is actually bring this across. And so actually now you can start to see some of the votes coming through here for what people are interested in. So Gal has, if you've lost the chat or the link, you're going to www.menti.com, and Gal's put the code in there, which is in the chat, which is 74095140. And if you have issues, you can actually just use the Zoom chat and just enter your preference on the Zoom chat instead. And we all kind of add it onto these totals, because I know it's a little bit, sometimes it can be a little bit hard, but I do see some votes coming through. And it does really seem like in this group particularly, there's a lot of interest in the East Monadnock area. So we're talking the bus from Keene to Peterborough, the bus that runs down Ringe, Jeffrey, Peterborough, and then demand response in that area. And then there's a little bit of interest in kind of the bus between Keene and Brattleboro, but most people here, it seems like, are most excited about that area. Keep in mind, you can vote for up to 3 different options. So if you also think it makes sense to have microtransit in Keene, you can vote for that one. Or if you like that east-west, north-south bus route, for example, don't forget about that one as well. And if you're having issues joining the breakout room, just a reminder, here are the instructions again, in case that's helpful for you. Oh, I'm actually going to turn off the whiteboard option.
Me. Is it possible to go from Peterborough all the way to Brattleboro?
Yes, so I mean, anything is possible theoretically. Typically, when bus systems are, bus systems usually do quite well when they're built around some kind of a hub. So often you'll see, like in cities and things like that, you do have like a central node, because that is a nice safe place for people to transfer. And so I think most likely if a bus went from Peterborough to Brattleboro, it would go from Peterborough to Keene, and then you'd hopefully have a pretty short connection in Keene, and then you would be able to connect onwards. And that's a more likely scenario. But I hear what you're saying, that it sounds like you believe there is some demand all the way from East Monadnock area all the way across to Brattleboro as well.
Yeah, there is.
I'm going to jump back to the results and see if we have any updates here, but again, it really does seem like generally people are quite excited about East Monadnock area, at least on this call. I do see a question. Does Brattleboro still have Amtrak service? The answer is yes. I believe it's only once a day at the moment, but yes, there is an Amtrak service in each direction.
I think that's actually going to increase. I think. Because there's going to be a new route.
Oh, interesting. Okay. If anyone had trouble, apologies if you weren't able to vote or had trouble voting, just add it to the chat in Zoom, and we will record your vote there in case you couldn't use this. But again, I just wanted to kind of show the results here.
There has, I just want to bring up this idea about Brattleboro to Peterborough. The Planning Commission has put forward, and Greyhound has actually responded to a route that connects Peterborough to Keene Brattleboro to Keene to Peterborough to Nashua to Boston. My understanding is that that bus was not getting very much ridership. The Greyhound pulled the operation. They weren't getting a subsidy from the state through the federal government, but that option has been put on the table for them to look at again.
So JB, my understanding from talking to Nicole McStay, our town administrator, is that bus actually that route never happened, at least not the Peterborough part of it.
It didn't. Yeah, that's true. I shouldn't have said Peterborough. It
Okay.
went through Peterborough. It was Greyhound actually talked to the town of Peterborough about using the new Grove Street parking lot as a stop. Yep. By the time the lot was built, it was about the time that they pulled that bus route.
Okay.
So it never really got off the ground, but it was passing right through town. That could have happened, but they weren't getting enough demand from Brattleboro and Keene.
Okay.
So just one last activity. I was going to also allow anyone to leave final comments within Menti. So basically, how that works is, sorry, let me go to the next slide. Now, if you're still in there, you can just add a comment. It will show up on the screen here. You can type anything you want. If you have any other things you want us to think about, or any final notes, or something you've already commented, but you just want to really reinforce it, feel free to kind of type it in as well, and it will show up on the screen here. And we don't know who typed what, so you can kind of type things maybe that you didn't feel comfortable saying otherwise. So I'll give you all a moment, and just a reminder, here are the instructions again, in case you need to go back into Menti. So we can jump across and see if we've got any comments yet. No comments yet. I'll give it another minute, and then we can kind of go on to the next steps. But I'm sure some of you might still be typing, so I'll give you a moment. Okay, so I see one question. If public transportation isn't profitable, why would VIA do public transportation? How do they stay in business? So this is a question about, I guess, any contractor who operates in public transportation. And basically, public transportation is subsidized. And so many transit agencies will, or many many governments will use contractors to either plan public transportation services or to operate public transportation services. And those contractors will charge for their time. But as a whole, when I say public transportation isn't profitable, what I'm meaning is the cost of operating a bus is much more than the amount a passenger typically pays. So when you get on a bus and you pay $2 to ride the bus or $1 to ride the bus, it's actually costing on average somewhere between $10 and $30 to provide that trip. And so that's just what I meant about public transportation not being profitable. And the rest of that money comes from government subsidies. So those are state, federal, and local funding sources. And then, okay, so going on, Peterborough, yes, Peterborough to Keene, definitely hearing that loud and clear in this meeting. It sounds like, yes, other people appreciate the benefits of public transportation. And I hear on demand could be a great start to grow in East Monadnock, and then maybe bus routes in the future, and connecting to Amtrak and some of those longer distance services, and really thinking, again, this is focused on East Monadnock, could be really exciting. So thank you all for adding your comments. You can add comments after I leave the screen, and I will see them afterwards as well. So thank you. Excellent. So in terms of next steps, I'll hand it over to JB to wrap up in a moment. But before I do, this was actually the third public meeting. We did 2 public meetings in person last week. We did one in Peterborough, we did one in Keene. So this is the virtual one, the third in the series. We might eliminate some low potential alternatives, but to be honest, all of the alternatives so far, no one has really, there's not been like any that have very consistently been disliked. So we'll probably at least look into many of them. And so we'll be working out how much they'll cost to operate. We'll be running simulations for any of the microtransit services. And then once we spend a bunch more time planning out these bus routes, we will actually have another round of public meetings, and they'll be in the fall. So we have all of your emails, and we'll be sure to invite you all to that second round of public meetings once they're scheduled, to kind of share what we heard overall and where we kind of think the most potential is, and really like have some, I guess, more detailed recommendations. Because as you could tell today, everything's very early stage, and that's the point. We don't want to plan everything and then come ask you about it, because the whole point is to hear from you about what's useful. So that's why I think we wanted to come here with just very rough ideas for today's meeting. JB, did you have anything else that you wanted to add as before we wrap up?
Sure. I just want to make it clear that what we're doing is a feasibility study, and our full intention is to try to improve transit in our region. We know already that our entire region is lacking in transportation options. It's a big problem. Part of it is because we're a rural state. We don't have a lot of density. It's hard to make transit work. Part of it is because there's not a lot of funding for transit. As Cahal said, transit is subsidized. You may not know this, but the state of New Hampshire is, in the last report that I saw on federal and state funding in transit, New Hampshire was ranked just above the state of Wyoming as the worst, the least generous in terms of providing subsidy for transportation. They have provided subsidy for capital improvements for buses. They have not really provided any funding for operations. So this is a big challenge, and what we're trying to do is prioritize. We don't have unlimited resources to create a transit system. So we're looking at where's the biggest bang for the buck, where's the greatest need, and that's why we came up with some of these scenarios that we put forward in front of you. We've known for a long time the Eastern Monadnock region has had no options other than CBTC and social service agencies providing services. We know that Winchester is one of our, the most challenged communities in terms of the demographics there, low income, people with disabilities, and so forth. So we're trying to put the limited resources that we have in the best place. We really appreciate your time tonight to provide public input. We will use this information to develop next steps in terms of looking at which of these services we want to take a closer look at, and modeling and understanding the costs and how many vehicles would need to operate these services and how many people are we likely to serve. And I think the last thing I'll do is I'm just going to put in the chat my email and my telephone number. Feel free to copy it down if you want to talk offline and continue the discussion. There are other opportunities outside of the study to get involved with transportation. There's something called the Monadnock Region Coordinating Council, which is an entity that we provide staff support to that tries to integrate all the different transit providers in the region to work together, not duplicate services and so forth. In fact, Terry Palmer, who's with us tonight, is the state lead in working on that project. So give me a call if you want to talk more about transit. It's a very complicated topic. It's but glad to talk about it more with you. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Very much, everyone. Bye.